how do you follow such a dynamic intro, right? Hello, everyone. Glad you're joining us for this meetup. My name is Drees, but I'm only one of the 3 organizers for this meetup. Suzanne Daniels and Nick Trog are backstage doing the more important stuff, like doing the production and discussing stuff with you in our Discord channel. More on the Discord channel in a little bit. So Suzanne, Nick, and I, we met when we were all still working at Microsoft, and that's also where we started this meetup. Suzanne has since moved on and is now a developer relations lead at Spotify. I work as a staff developer advocate at Aiven, and Nick is a senior content developer at Microsoft. So the 3 of us started this virtual first and only meetup to share our enthusiasm for open source topics, especially around bigger events like Hacktoberfest and the annual FOSDEM conference in Brussels. We've at one point even done these meetups on a weekly cadence, which was definitely bananas. And we're now kickstarting this meetup series again, but on a much healthier monthly cadence. And so today we'll talk about open source program offices, or OSPOs. Next week or next month. See, I almost wanted to say next week. So next month, we'll be talking about open source databases, data solutions, and we already have a couple of dates planned to talk about docs and open source documentation tools, open source business models, and other topics as well. Please suggest in the Discord chat any topics that you would love for us to talk about, or maybe you want to join a panel about. We'd love to hear from you. Before I move on and introduce our guests of today, I want to quickly draw your attention to our code of conduct. It's available on Contributing.today/code-of-conduct. We want this to be a welcoming and safe environment for everybody to learn and chat with each other. If you notice anything that you reckon doesn't align with our COC, please reach out to either me or Suze or Nick. You can find our contact details on that page as well. All right, so I guess that means it's time to introduce some of our guests to our virtual stage, or maybe first that Discord channel. If you go to our website, Contributing.today, which is maybe where you're watching this meetup from, but I think we're like live on LinkedIn and Twitter and Twitch and YouTube and like all kinds of places. There is a link to a Discord channel. If you follow that, you'll land in our Discord channel and you can ask questions to our guests or stuff that you want me to talk to our guests about. Okay, now really, let's introduce our guests. I'll introduce everybody one by one. I know that we were supposed to have Amanda Casari on as well, but we just got word that she has a terrible migraine and can't make it. So wishing her a speedy recovery, and maybe we can invite Amanda on a follow-up show. So that will leave me to introduce Josep Prat first, who is my colleague at Aiven in Open Source Engineering Manager. Hi, Josep. Then we have Ploug Krogslund. I tried to pronounce it right. I don't know if I got it.
I think you did a good job.
OSPO lead at Spotify. And then last but definitely not least, Brasseur, who is a open source and tech strategist at Wipro and the author of Forge Your Future with Open Source. Welcome, everyone. Did I get everybody's intros right? Is there anything you would like to add?
You did a great job with the names.
Yeah.
I don't know. I sense a little bit of sarcasm in there, but moving on. Before we get any of the questions from our audience, I have a list of questions that I am dying to ask you, and because I'm the host, I decide, right? So let's do a first round of what does the OSPO at your company do, and maybe how big is it in terms of headcount, FTEs, and what is it that the OSPO's like prime tasks are. We'll go from we'll follow the clock, so that means Josep, you're first.
So thank you. So I will kick off this discussion. So the OSPO Aiven has 3 main areas that we have an impact. It's basically contributing to new open source projects that we might create, contribute to existing ones, and at the same time fostering like the open source culture within the company. And the last one, which is probably the least interesting one for many, many people is the governance and compliant ones, which some people might think, oh yeah, that's also part of the OSPO tasks, and they might not realize that that's part of the job. But if I need to say what's the time, so where we spend most time, it's basically contributing to third-party open source projects. So the majority of the people in the team works on projects that do not belong to Aiven. They belong to different other organizations. So we contribute to Kafka, we contribute to OpenSearch, Postgres, Apache Flink. So we contribute to all of these projects and do not belong to Aiven. So that's one of the really weird things and really nice things we do at Aiven. And the team is around 10 people at the moment.
Very cool. Vicky?
Oh, I see. You're going around that direction.
Oh, right. No, now I'm just entirely random.
That's fine. That keeps me on my toes.
Actually, fun fact about me, I can't read an analog clock. So even if I say like clockwise, that doesn't mean anything substantial. Anyway, Vicky.
No, I entirely understand. For the longest time, I had a watch that ran intentionally opposite. And so after that, I just could not read an analog clock very well because I could not tell which way is the quote right way. So I'm with you there. So OSPOs, So the Wipro OSPO is not your standard sort of OSPO because we're more like a think tank OSPO. Most OSPOs work internally to do a lot of work as Josep said, to spread open source culture, to support open source within the organization. And we do that, but we do a lot more of the bigger picture strategic things. And we also work a great deal because we're Wipro and we are a global service integrator and a consultancy and all that sort of stuff. We help other companies start OSPOs and do really well at their OSPOs as well. So we've been doing that for a great deal of time. I've only been at Wipro for about a handful of months, just a few months. But I've been doing OSPO and open source strategy for companies for a very long time. It just happened to be at Wipro for a very short time.
Awesome. Bear, you're next.
I was waiting for what you were going to do next. I was just curious what direction you want to go.
You never know. You never know.
You never know. Okay. So I think what we do at Spotify is very, very similar to what Josep described as well. We have some operational tasks, like compliance and legal is obviously a part of that, enable how we contribute to other projects and how we release our own. That's like the operational part of it. Then you can say the more strategic part of it is to kind of drive the conversation of why do we actually engage in open source? That's very much a thing we should own as well. The answer can't just be that it's the right thing to do. We kind of have to have a bit more like substance behind that. So that's like the broader what we try to drive here. But again, with the caveat, I've only been at Spotify for 2 months, so this is still like something that's gonna go over the next coming months. And yeah, I think that's the overall. I think Joseph already described what we do, the operational parts, and then this more strategic topic of owning the why, and then a lot of things come out of that, like how do we actually do things the right way, and how do we reduce the different friction points in the way we work with open source.
Awesome. And because you say you've only been there for 2 months, does that also mean that the OSPO is like so very much in its infancy?
It's so this is kind of the second or third iteration of an OSPO at Spotify.
Okay.
So I think the first version of it is very much like driven as a passion project by a small group of engineers at Spotify, and they very much drove the first iteration of just getting started with open source at Spotify. And then over time that kind of changed into having a more like established OSPO that should actually drive this topic instead of just depending on people doing it in their free time. So yeah, so this is still like a fairly new thing as like an established team, but it has very much been a topic that's been at Spotify for a while.
Okay. Well, I sort of want to like hook in on that, and then we'll go a certain way with whoever is next. You're like, okay, maybe the future is bright. Like you don't necessarily know where you're gonna go next, but maybe you have a little bit of an idea. So I would love to hear from you where you think the OSPO at Spotify is going next, and then from the rest of the group where like how it's involved at your companies and where you expect it to grow next as well. So Per, maybe you can.
Yeah, so that's an interesting. So I think right now we're trying to establish just a strategy, and from there we will definitely go towards establishing a shared idea of why we're actually doing this from a business perspective. As you can say, open source is kind of special in the way that for a long time this has kind of been thought of as this like special thing that you do it because it's the right thing. But I think it's important for the topic that you actually boil it down to why is it important as a business objective to do these things. So it's not just as this kind of very soft value. And I think it's important. Otherwise, you don't really get the attention or the priority that it needs. If a team is just doing it because it's nice, it's one of the first things that's getting pushed to the side when more important things come along. Like when there's actual business priorities there, then open source tend to be pushed aside because you haven't really defined why it's important. So that's very much a thing we need to work on to get a shared understanding across the business of why is this important and why do you actually benefit as an individual or as a team or as the business to actually engage in this. And that we don't have a shared understanding. We have a lot of versions of that understanding, but that's definitely something we need to kind of build up, and so everyone understands why does a team need to spend resources on an open source project? Why is it good for an engineer to spend time on maintaining some code in the open rather than just like focusing on business problems? And again, why is it important for the business to do it? And if we don't have that understanding, it becomes like this kind of hobby, nice thing to do for the business, and then you can easily push it aside.
Right, or not have budget for it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's important to have that discussion. Then I think what comes from that, there is also how do you actually get an organization to work with open source in the same way as they work with anything else inside of the business. So that's all the way down to just like how do you keep a project in the open? And that's a big shift for the team because all of a sudden they might have an issue tracker in the open. They might need to change their build system into something else. Like these are just like friction points in how you actually practically do the work. And there's an OSPO, we can kind of drive that as well to say, well, we do need to have a build system that actually helps teams do the thing they need to do and also help teams understand how they reserve time for like external feature requests versus internal, all that. So it's a different way of working, and we kind of need to establish that and foster the culture as well.
Great. Well, and Josep, because you before said, well, you're also doing what others might consider the boring stuff, but I think a lot of that stuff is like governance and so on, and maybe that's even why some OSPOs at some companies actually get started, right? Because it's maybe a security risk, and you want to look at licenses and make sure that all the bits and pieces that your company relies on is something that it can continue to rely on. Is that why the OSPO started at all at Aiven, or was there a different reason?
So the story of Aiven and the OSPO it's an interesting one, I think, or at least I liked it when I joined Aiven. Now it's I need to count months as well with like Vicky said before, I think it was kind of 10 months ago. Yeah. So I joined Aiven 10 months ago, and that's basically kind of how old the OSPO is. Before than that, there was a culture in Aiven. So Aiven it's like a 6-year-old company. It basically grows really fast. So before it was a really small company where since the beginning, like the 4 founders were contributing to open source. Everything that needed to be like patched upstream was patched upstream. If something could be open source because it was not really related to the business, but could help the bigger community, that was open sourced and was really the project. So that started from the very beginning. And it basically was done through the product themes, and as was what Prat was mentioning as well. It's like at one point in time when you grow enough and when you need to deliver things constantly and you need to like do the hyper scaling and basically grow in big dimensions, you will have these tensions like, is the product more important? Is the open sourcing of that thing more important? What wins? So at this point in time, it was like, okay, we need to do something. We need to establish this thing. We need to make an entity that can perform those tasks independently of what the product needs or doesn't need or demands or timelines or roadmaps. So that's when, like around 10 months ago, Aiven decided to create and make a bet to say, like, we need to create a dedicated team for the OSPO. And the team was starting to be like, okay, we need to one of the things we wanted to do was we want to make sure that all the projects that we rely on are always being maintained. They are always in health. They are always not just driven by one single person or one single company. We want to always bring this extra more people into the mix. So it's not just one shop thing, like only one single company behind that project. So that was one of the reasons behind. But of course, that's only the initial reason when you say that's why I want it. But then you start operating and you realize, okay, cool, that's great. But we have all the people need to contribute to these projects. We need to sign CLAs. Can they do it on their own? They need to talk to us. We need to make some kind of process there. We need to annotate those things. We need to discuss with lawyers. Is there that it's a normal CLA or it's a tricky one? Can we just give them carte blanche and they can just do whatever they want, or they need to approve every single thing that needs to be contributed upstream? So some of those things are being discussed, and we already have a clear picture of what we want. So basically, in a general term speaking, every single engineer at Aiven, whenever they need to fix something upstream, they can just go directly and fix it. The only thing they need to go and talk to us is when they need to sign a CLA or any of that kind of level thing. So any kind of agreement needs to be signed. They need to approach us to make sure that that's okay and it's aligned. And we just go with legal, check those things. But then the other one is like, okay, that's one part, but we are also producing some open source projects. And the product teams come with great ideas. And then we need to discuss with them, okay, you want to open source this thing. And we partner with them to make that thing possible. And then, okay, what it means to open source a project. And that's probably a question that we can discuss afterwards, but also like what it means open source a project. Is just clicking a button in GitHub or whatever repository tool that you have, is just clicking that button and open source? No. So
No?
Sorry, spoiler. No, you need to do way more things. So that's one of the things that we also need to take care of. We need to make sure that people understand it's not just throwing the whole thing over the fence. And there are different things you need to do. You need to make sure that we foster communities. We need to make sure the project is in well shape. So these are the things that we need to do. And then, of course, we also are consumers of open source. And that means that we need to make sure that everything we consume the right things. We don't have, I don't want to say wrong licenses, but basically incompatible licenses with the things we do, or that the projects we use are legally correct and can be shared the way they are shared. And these are the things that we also need to make sure. But that thing, we are not alone, and we partner with our security teams, which are a great team.
Yeah, and I want to talk about some of the stakeholders internally in a little bit. Yep. Vicky, can you tell a little bit about the key motivators to start an OSPO, where, like how it's been evolving and where you see it going in the future at Wipro?
So rather than focusing directly on Wipro, because we do so much of helping other companies do this sort of stuff, I think it'll be more useful for the audience to just speak more generally. Because our OSPO is really quite unique, and I think doesn't fit into the requirements for most other companies, and because we really are more of a consultancy, right? So for other companies, it's been really interesting. I've been around since there was no open source, and before there was no OSPO, that sort of thing. The official first OSPO, by the way, was way back at Sun Microsystems back in the 90s. So the concept of OSPO has been around for quite a while, but it hasn't really gained a lot of adoption until recently. And largely that is thanks to obviously the dramatic growth of free and open source software, but more recently, it's thanks to the growing mind share of the criticality of free and open source software, and that it creates this vast supply chain that underpins pretty much all technology anywhere, be you a software company, a hardware company, a shipping company. It's, open source is in there everywhere, and it is absolutely fundamental to the operating of various businesses. And companies are starting to figure that out, where before, you'd have companies going, no open source, absolutely not, it's terrible. And then you'd have your developers kind of bringing it in the back door anyway, because they had to get their work done, and this was the best way to do it. Well, now companies are starting to figure out not only has all this open source come in the back door, but now they're letting it in the front door as well, and they don't even know what they're using. And so now they're starting to decide that, well, maybe we should have an organization to do this, to not only clean up the house that we have now, all those things that we have and we're using already, to make sure, you've got your ducks in a row. We know what the links are in that supply chain. So if one of them is weak, we can help fix it up, which is what Josep and his team does a great deal of. And that's rare, frankly, to have a company that is aware of that and does something about that. But also, as things come in, make sure we're able to sustain them and use them properly, and we're able to give back and all those sort of things. But you have to do that in a responsible way for the business. Because when you get right down to it, this is a business thing. This is a business need. And while I myself personally have very strong free software, free all the things inclinations, my businesses and the companies I work with, they have their own needs, their own strategies, their own goals. And how can we, as Wipro and the Wipro OSPO, help them be more successful through free and open source software? How can we help you meet your goals for marketing, for security, for product? There's all different things. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't really realize about OSPOs, is that we are cross-functional, right? And depending upon your company and its strategy, your OSPO may focus more on a different area. You may be more of an outbound marketing OSPO. You may be more of an inbound compliance OSPO. You may be more like Aiven, more of an outbound contributing OSPO, right? And different OSPOs will have different balances. There is no one way to do it. And so if anyone tells you there's one way to do it, they frankly don't know what they're talking about, and they're full of blue mud up to their eyebrows, right? They just don't. I'm trying to keep things nice and PG rated, because usually I'm not, but for you, I will.
Well, I'm stealing that expression, and I'm using it in a sentence tomorrow. Yeah.
Please do. That one's licensed CC0, so go ahead and use it as much as you want.
And no attribution. So that means CC0 was no attribution, right?
CC0, no attribution. That's as close as we can get to public domain. It's even public domain in Germany.
Yes. We won't go there today. It will be like 3 hours of talking about German laws probably on that regard.
Oh, I know. I don't. Yeah, I'm not getting into the licensing conversations right now, because all I've got is tea and it's not strong enough.
Okay, I'm putting down a note to re-invite you for our license. We've done one on licensing, and it was probably the toughest one, toughest one of these meetups that I've done before. But yeah, I'll invite you to the next edition of that one for sure. Anyway, because you were talking about stakeholders, I want to ask Per and Josep if they can talk a little bit about what the most important stakeholders in their companies are, while I recover and regain.
Okay, so should I go first? So we keep this like really random, or we actually going against the clock now, I guess. So I think our stakeholders will change over time. I think very much right now, our primary stakeholders is in the engineering and the platform departments of like enabling the actual like infrastructure to work on open source projects and engaging with teams on why they're doing it. But then we also have some coming. Of course, we have a natural stakeholder in legal and security as well, as they have kind of the same interests as us in like reducing the risk of this usage of open source. But I also see that we will have a growing stakeholder in for instance, like HR, and like how do we see open source work as a work inside of a company? How do we look at promotions and career progression in regards to open source? Because if you do all these things for like things outside the company, is this actually part of your career? So I think that will become a stakeholder for us as well. And then there's the talent acquisition. How do we actively use our open source work as a hiring mechanism as well? How can teams use their open source projects to hire new people and kind of find candidates for the different roles? And how can we also use our open source projects to kind of make our company more interesting for like a broader hiring perspective as well. So I think that's overall our most important ones right now.
Wait. Pick me.
Go for it.
I want to build on something that Per said, because it's becoming more and more important, and it's not talked about enough in companies, which is the importance in open source to hiring, but especially right now to retention. It costs your company so much less to keep people happy and to treat them well than it does to rehire people whom you piss off and who leave. So free and open source software, if you have good policies and procedures around that as a company, it can help to retain a lot of good people, not only by allowing them to do what they want to do, but by giving them incredible, abundant opportunities to grow. Not only as programmers, but also there are so many great opportunities for program managers, documentarians, marketing people, security people, info people. Everyone has a role in free and open source software. And so if you do it right as a company, you can really help to build your the knowledge and experience of the people you have and keep them happy. And so they're going to want to stick with you and tell all their friends, wow, I have a great company, come join me. But also it's a really good recruiting form to say, look, we appreciate your work in free and open source software. We want to support it. Here are our open policies that we have put on the web that we want everyone to share and to fork and to use. And that's really, really important. Not enough OSPOs are partnering with their HR departments, and more really, really should.
I completely agree with that sentence. And it's funny that you mentioned this, Day, because that was one of the things that I wanted to say as well, like the partnering with both talent acquisition, but also with HR on retention. It's one of the key things, and making sure that the OSPO is not seen as the gatekeeper of the open source. It's one of the things that we need to work on. And that's one of the things that was the first thing that I made clear, absolutely clear, when the OSPO was introduced, was we are not the ones doing open source exclusively. Like we don't have we don't hold that thing and it's ours and you cannot get near that one. Absolutely not. It's the contrary. We want everyone to come to us, and everyone should be welcome to contribute. And if you think that you're lost, come to us and we will just help you as much as we can, and we will do everything in our reach to make you reach these things you want to do and to contribute upstream. And just as an anecdote, in my 2 previous companies, I tried to contribute on work time the legal way. I mean, being in Germany, you need to do it the legal way. Per, you might know what I mean if you're in Germany.
Compliance.
So there was a CLA, and as it wasn't working time, so I needed to use not the individual CLA, but the corporate CLA. So I needed to talk to the company. They didn't even understand what I was asking for. So many companies didn't even understand, given the question, like, I need you to sign this paper because I want to contribute something open source. And obviously the text says, I need to give away the intellectual property rights of the things I'm writing in company time to another company. And that's like, no. And
that sounds really scary. Yeah.
I mean, it is. I mean, for people who are not understanding what open source is, it's really scary. And that's where we come in. And that's when the OSPOs come in and say, hey, let me explain you what this thing means and what impact does it have and what it does not have. So these things that you fear will not happen. That's what will happen. And that's what we need to do. And yeah, and if I can be poetic on going back to the question, like, what's my stakeholder? The community.
Wow.
As a headline of it's a good headline. But basically,
if you come up with these one-liners already, what are you going to say for the parting words? Joseph, you have to you have to preserve some of this.
I need to work on that bit. But anyway, it's true. This is one of the things that we have the community as stakeholders, because one of the things we do is we try to leave the community better than what we encountered them when we joined. So we need to listen to what the community needs. which are the needs of this community, which are the needs of this other community, which are the needs of the other community, and then act accordingly. And this is basically they are not working at Aiven. So the people who I listen the most, and that's an exaggeration, do not work at Aiven. Then I need to listen to the ones at Aiven, and then I work with them, and I need to make sure that everything at Aiven works smoothly. But one big chunk of the things that we need to listen to and to react to are outside. And our CISO, Jamie Arlen, who's a really great guy. Usually when he does interviews and he explains what the OSPO team does, he usually says, yeah, there are a bunch of people who are basically paid by Aiven, but they work not on Aiven. And that's a really nice simplification and a nice way of explaining what we do. Obviously exaggerating, but it kind of fits what we do.
So because you said the OSPO doesn't own the open source efforts within a company, maybe another thing that you do own, I really love how I do this, is the dependency graph for your company. So the software bill of materials, right? The SBOM. So is this something that the OSPO owns? Is this something where like people in the company come to the OSPO for guidance? Is this maybe a moving target with more libraries or dependencies, being added to the stack? I don't know who I want to start. Per, you start.
All right. So no, the OSPO doesn't own the dependency graph. This is a topic that's owned by security, because we have a very, very real current security task there to just know what's in our dependencies tree right now. But that doesn't mean we're not interested in it, but for different reasons. We let security deal with the security topic there of handling vulnerabilities. My perspective on it, that we are more interested in it for knowing what projects could we potentially support, what potential projects could potentially be risky, more from like a health perspective, not so much a security perspective, and also for like a funding perspective as well. Like where can we actually help? Because these are things that's critical for our business, and it's not just about reducing risk, or it is in that sense from the business point of view, but it is also to make sure that these project maintainers stay happy and healthy and engaged in their projects. And there we have different mechanisms, either directing our engineers towards supporting the projects, supporting them financially, or just keeping an eye on them for like in means of like, maybe we need to migrate to something else in the near future because we can see this project is really slowing down, or it's not really anything happening anymore. So yeah, we don't own the graph. It's definitely a moving target all the time, but it's something that for us, or for Spotify at least, is something that the security team handles right now.
Right. Vicky, from the companies that you consulted, do you have an idea of like if the most OSPOs own that or not?
It's very rare for an OSPO to own this. Sometimes you will, and this is typically in the older companies where the OSPOs were originally formed around primarily compliance. And so those are typically larger companies, typically older companies, and it's almost always run kind of by legal, right? And that is a massive hand-wavy generalization, but it tends to hold true. And what you find in most other companies is that either they have no clue what their software supply chain is, or they've kind of peeked into the box, looked at their software supply chain, shut the box quickly and put it in the closet and locked it. Right? They don't want to think about it too much because it is big and complicated. Because if you've ever looked at an actual SBOM, I don't recommend you do that unless you have to. By the way, this is not something anyone does for fun. Okay, some people do. I do know some people who do this for fun. But SBOMs are really, they're definitely moving targets. They are very much a flowing sort of thing because, again, you have developers who just have to get their work done. And if that involves bringing in a new NPM library, well, that just brought in another 250 NPM libraries, right? And so that's just going to turn your software bill of materials into this massive tangled thing that you have to track. And so coming up with a way so you can track that automatically is complicated because there's no one right way to do it, and it has to tie into your CI/CD and all those things. And then where do you track that? And do you track the artifacts, i.e. the actual libraries themselves? Do you storing those somewhere? Are you using a certain format, SPDX or Cyclone DX, or any of the other number of formats? There's lots of different moving parts involved with the SBOM, and it's really complicated. That's even before you get to security and compliance. Just gathering the information is really, really difficult. And then keeping it up to date, also difficult. It's kind of like a wiki page otherwise, where you put information there and it's where it goes to die. You have to make sure your SBOM is not where your supply chain information goes to die. It has to become a living, breathing thing, because your software is a living, breathing thing. It is constantly changing. So you have to keep things up to date appropriately. And that's usually not something that the OSPO owns, but it consults on, right? And it helps with, and it helps to guide and direct and keep up to date on the latest things, like, hey, did you know SPDX is now an ISO standard? That sort of thing. Maybe we should switch to SPDX. But often it is run by more of the whoever's running CI/CD in your company, be that a team in your company in development or infrastructure, or maybe it's going to be in security. Security is always going to be involved, and if they're not, they really should be. So call them right now and get them on the horn and get a meeting, because otherwise they're going to be really surprised to hear you have this information, but hopefully in a happy way. So yeah, but it's not going to be the OSPO. OSPO is going to be looking, as Per said, more about the ecosystem perspective, the bigger picture for the open source ecosystem. Now that we know what's in our supply chain, again, what are those weak links that are going to break and then create a huge problem for our product, which can go boom and crash because this one link broke and we weren't aware of it. So what can we do to weld that link together and make it stronger? Is that like Aiven does by contributing back and making sure that there are no single points of failure? Or is it by looking at the project and going, wow, that hasn't been maintained in 5 years. Let's re-architect and take that library out and replace it with something that's more sustainable? Or, there's lots of different ways, and it depends upon your product and your company and what makes the right sense. But you can't make that informed decision if you don't know what that SBOM is, if you don't know what's in your supply chain. And I'm going to shut up now and let the guys talk some more.
All right.
I can say.
I keep catching you off guard, Flor.
No, I love it. I love it. I'm here for it. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Flor is recovering. I can say that we do exactly the same thing as Per mentioned. The more or less the one owning is security, and is the one basically taking care of looking at where the next vulnerability might come from. That would be probably their interest in having an overview of that one. And at the same time, what we look at is what is the project, what is the fragile link in this chain? And as Vicky was saying, where we need to put some more emphasis, what we need to look at, where it might not break, because that's the whole thing. It's just guessing and taking a look at where might be problems in the future. And the fact that we will work there, probably they will never happen. So then probably we need to explain, like, maybe it's because we put effort in there that it didn't happen. But that's the observing the situation then changes the reality, right? So that's
yeah. And I love that you say that, like, maybe Vicky, by all means, like.
Well, I want to, really reinforce something that Josep said, which is, being able to identify the health, right, of the project. For your own health, yes, you can just go to the internet and ask random strangers, hey, what is this weird thing I found? Is it bad for me? But really, you should go to a doctor. You should go to a specialist. There are people who know one way or another whether this is healthy. And that's where the OSPO comes in. Because most people, when I talk to them, they have no idea how to tell whether a project is healthy or not. You can look at metrics, and there are companies like Bitergia who have just excellent skills in open source metrics and health. And there are projects like CHAOSS, CHAOSS, which again is about community health and AOSS, whatever those are. OSS is open source. I don't know what the A is. But, so there are ways to do it. But if you don't know to look for these things, if you aren't familiar with this information, then how are you going to learn? Well, your OSPO knows already, right? And so people like Josep and Per and me, we can look at this project and within 5 minutes go, oh, yeah, that one's okay, or maybe not. Because we have those skills. And it's kind of like a senior engineer, right? They can look at a piece of code, and because they've seen some things, right? They've been through it, and they can look at that code and go, no, that's going to be very bad. Whereas a more junior engineer, someone new, is going to go, I don't know, it looks okay to me. So your OSPO is that senior engineer from an open source community perspective. They can look at something and go, yes, this is going to be good, this is going to be fine, most likely, right? Whereas somebody brand new to open source, they can be your junior engineer. They're still learning how to make those calls on the community side.
Yeah.
And Vicky,
Joseph, I just wanted to say, I heard your mechanical keyboard. So you've looked up what the A in chaos is.
Yes, it's Community Health Analytics open source software.
There you go.
And yes, as Flo was saying, yeah, my mechanical keyboard, which by the way, it's beautiful.
It is lovely. It has no,
it has no colors. It's just round keys and just noisy. Anyway, so analytics was the A.
Yeah. So I think just to add, I think to this whole dependency graph, I think I'm probably not the only one who spent December with Log4j. And I think it's just if you look at the metrics for Log4j, it probably looks perfectly healthy and well maintained from the outside. And so I don't think it's always about just determining what's going to happen bad in the future. It's also just being able to do something about it, because we spend a tremendous, not in Spotify, but we spend a tremendous amount of time actually just figuring out, where do we use Log4j? And no one really knew. And then it was like, well, it might be like the third layer down in the graph of some project that we pulled into some Aiven file. Or it was actually like a third-party SaaS provider that we depend on. They actually use Log4j inside of their systems, but we don't know, but we actually have our data in their systems. So I think the dependency graph becomes more and more important for companies to just have in place for these kind of scenarios as well. We do need to have this up to date all the time, and there's no way around automating this at some point so that you can act fast in these cases. And if you don't have the data, it's a scramble to just figure that out across all your different services. So you do need to have it.
I want to mention one thing as well on the cows. The cows created one nice project which is called Open Source Software Criticality Factor, which is pretty cool, which basically goes and tries to analyze cold data, and I will mean what I mean with cold data, to try to find how critical a project is. But that's only, as Vicky was saying, part of the picture. That only means how, if that thing would break tomorrow, how broken the internet will be. So the higher criticality factor is, the more broken the whole internet is. But there is another thing, which is what we are, it's not hard, it's not a cold number thing that you can calculate, which is the fragility status or fragility factor of a project. And for now, probably we don't have a metric for that one. We need to come up with those things. We need to define what it means to be fragile. And that's what Vicky was saying before. We have that intuition. No, that project might break, not because it will have bugs or vulnerabilities. It might break in the sense that it might be unmaintained, or it might be only like relying on people on their free time, or it's only one company behind, or.
Yeah, and that's I really like that you brought up that criticality scores there on chaos, because I mean that's just one of the many things it does, is to look at, how critical are these things. We've, if you've been around open source software enough, you have seen that XKCD, where this pile of children's blocks, right, exactly. This big pile of children's blocks, and it's all supported right down here by that one open source project, right? It's the pile of children's blocks represents a software program, and it's all supported on one tiny block at the bottom that itself is supported by one dude in Nebraska. And I spend a lot of time in the OpenSSF, the Open Source Software Security Foundation right now. And they've taken to calling that the Lib Nebraska problem, where there's a library maintained by one person in Nebraska. And how can you identify some of those more automatically, more programmatically? And there's a project that was just announced last week, not project, but a report out of Harvard, the Harvard Open Source Census 2. Yep. Electric Boogaloo, right? So it's kind of the follow-up to the first one, and it takes multiple streams of data and combines them to figure out what are some of these really critical projects of open source, and they list 1,000 of them. And they had to split out NPM separately because otherwise it really polluted the data because there's so much NPM out there. This is not a bag on NPM, it's just the way it's architected and works, and so they split it out separately. And that's the sort of stuff that is really going to be valuable to help train up people in open source, because now we have data from Harvard and various other places where we can go, look, these are really important things, and here's how the criteria they used to determine what is critical, what is important. And that makes it easier for us to talk to people about it, and that's going to be really, really useful. However, it is a paper from Harvard, so it is a little long and it takes a little bit to get through, but it's valuable stuff. It's really great.
Yeah, I posted an XKCD in the Discord channel. Yeah, thank you, Sus. I feel like we haven't had one of these meetups where we haven't shown this XKCD or it's been posted in the chat.
I mean, it's a great thing. It's a great allegory of how the internet works. I mean,
I have it bookmarked. I am not kidding. Like, this comes back over and over again. I love how all of you mentioned metrics at one point. I'm curious because I feel like the OSPO does a lot of stuff in the background, and it's maybe very hard to show where your impact on the company is, like in hard sort of like things. And I've seen that one of the audience questions is also like, what would even happen if the OSPO weren't there? What if you weren't there? So maybe we can talk about metrics a little bit. How do you measure what business impact you have and, like communicate to the business why you're there? Josep starts because,
Because.
Reason.
So, because reasons. So basically, we decided to have three basic key metrics to impose on ourselves. So to try to measure how we perform individually, to then extrapolate this thing to how we perform as a team. We have three main areas where we kind of look at and we try to measure our impact. The first one is, and the wording is precise on what it means. So it's working on issues. So how many issues, community issues we work on. We just basically help collaborate, support, fix, or in any kind of sense in that. So that's one of the metrics we do, like how many community issues we contribute and collaborate. The second one is one important thing that people tend to forget, which is if you are on GitHub, it's pull requests and reviews. If you are on other systems, it's going to the patch and review the patch that is sent on the mailing list. That thing should be done more. And we should not just contribute patches, and we should also review those ones. So another metric we have is how many patches did we review? How many opinions did we give to other people on features? And the last one is sharing the knowledge. It's trying to share things on via blog posts, going to conferences, going to meetups, going to places, sharing and explaining things we learned, things that we think that could be changed, or just basically explaining how things work. And these are the main three things that we basically measure ourselves. And this is basically how we can just regulate, okay, was this quarter good? Was it not that good? We need to change, we need to improve something, we need to change something in some direction there. So that's one of the things that we do. And then we need to translate this thing to business, because again, that's really great. But I mean, I think the three of us will agree that timings are in a complete different scale when we talk to business, and it's like it doesn't really match. So what product teams do, they release, hopefully, I hope everyone listening releases several times a day. And that's fine, that's perfect, and that's what you should aim for. That's not what works in open source. So you submit a pull request or you submit a patch on the mailing list and you wait. and wait. And you maybe wait a bit more. And at one point in time, it will be merged, it will be reviewed, and then you need to wait until the release happens. So everything goes in a really slower pace. And again, you might have some self-imposed OKRs for this quarter. The fact that you have it in 3 months, it's just a random number you picked. Nobody else in the world cares about these 3 months that you put your target. Nobody else cares. And the ones who need to merge your PR might not work in your company. They might not even know who you are. They might not
They definitely don't
that
care.
you have. They don't care that there is a 3-month window that you self-imposed. So how we overcome those things. And that's one of the reasons why I said it's important to notice that it didn't say how many issues we fixed or how many issues were merged, because that's completely outside of the scope. There is no way we can control that piece. So the only thing we can control is how many things we have an impact, how many things we contribute, how many things we work on, how many things we try to change. And that's the only thing we can basically have an impact and trying to leave it in a better place. And then we need to translate this into business, as I said. We need to basically say, okay, we worked on those things. We are listening to your requests. We are trying to find, make sure that these issues that you think they should be contributed upstream, they are contributed upstream. We are cleaning the project so it's healthier, and you will need not to worry about this project in the future. It will be stable and healthy.
Cool. Per?
So I think establishing metrics is a bit soon still, but what my working theory here is what we're going to do is that we have to position the Spotify to more of a culture of ownership of our projects rather than just a culture of releasing things. So that's kind of where we're going. So from my point of view, I need to have a set of metrics that says this is not the number of projects we have in the open, but this is actually the projects we take active ownership of. So these are actually the projects that kind of reaches a certain baseline of saying we don't really have any stale issues in there. We don't have any stale pull requests. We have a set number of maintainers that actually do take ownership of this. We have a team assigned as an owner, not just an individual that thinks that this is a cool hobby thing. A metric that says we actually deprecate projects because that's just the nature of software. Things come and go, and it would be unnatural for our portfolio project, which is in the hundreds, that we don't deprecate anything. So I actually think that's an important metric to say we can actually naturally deprecate things either by passing it over to other people or just archiving it on GitHub, because that shows that our life cycle actually works. So a metric that says our life cycle works, a metric says that we actually take active ownership of our projects. And then I think the last part is metrics that tells us that we actually reap the benefits of the work we put into it, which is, one is like the hiring aspect. How many people did we actually recruit from our open source projects? How many new employees did we find to our open source project? That's a metric we can measure. So that we should definitely have as well. And then on the individual projects, I think that's more for them to kind of figure out, like, where do they actually want to take this project? Are they going for like establishing this as an industry standard? Then that project should establish those metrics for that thing. Like we also have like Backstage coming from Spotify, and they have a completely different set of targets for their specific project. That's not really of any of the OSPO's business. But I think it's important for the OSPO to have an idea or a target of setting metrics saying, this is the number of projects where we actually have a clear defined purpose for this project. What do we want to get out of it? And maybe that's 50%. That's okay. And the rest of it is something we might figure out over time. But just knowing that we have this project because it's a great hiring mechanism for a very niche thing, and this is a great driver for something else, publicity, whatever. But just actually having that metric saying we know why we have it.
Cool. Vicky, I would love to hear from you what you advise companies to look at in terms of metrics or measuring that they're doing a good job.
I typically advise them to ignore metrics first, because everyone wants to jump to metrics. And they especially are very fond of easy things like GitHub stars and pull requests and things like that. Downloads, right? We call those vanity metrics, right? Things that you can put on a slide and look really impressive to some sort of executive somewhere, but they don't mean anything, frankly. And they're incredibly easy to game. Now, the metrics that matter are the ones that are tied specifically to business goals. So you can't do that if you don't know what your goals are to begin with. And that's the problem I find most often with companies. It's like, oh, we want to do open source. Great. I am so there. Let's do open source. Why? And they can't answer. They don't know why they want to do open source. Everyone's going to do open source. Yay. And I want to help them do it, but I want to help them do it in a responsible way, because as much as I believe in open source, I believe in your business remaining solvent and keeping food on the table of your employees and roofs over their heads. And you can't do that if you're just throwing money and time away that's just business malpractice. So do open source, yes, but know why you're doing it and know how you're doing it, which means coming up with goals, business goals, and then coming up with metrics that can show whether you're working towards those goals. Is that going to be patches that you've sent over and things like that? That this makes good sense for Aiven. This is a valid business reason for Aiven to be looking at that metric. I know, because I've talked to Josep about it, right? And it does make good sense for them to be doing this as a business to improve these projects. Or does it mean, more outreach? We're doing a lot more talks about this specific project or our projects or anything like that. Is it how many inbound contributions you have and the diversity of companies and people who are contributing to your project? Can you show that you are potentially growing that community? And is that community growth tied back to some sort of target and goal within your company? It could be hiring. It could be, reducing maintenance costs. It could be, there's any number of reasons why you might do this. But you have to have that goal and then come up with what's our plan to meet that goal? What are the metrics that can show that plan is on track? Are we checking those metrics frequently? Or are we just checking them at the end of the year when we have to fill out our strategy that we're going to then put in a slide deck and then set aside and not look at all year, right? No, you have to look at them frequently to make sure you're not veering off track, because the sooner you check that, the sooner you can get back on track, right? So if you wait until the end of the year, you could be way off here, and then it takes a lot of effort to march your work back towards your goals. So there are lots of different ways you can do this. And if you look at something like Cauldron.io from Bitergia, and it's free and open, and it can help give you a lot of metrics about any free and open source software project that you throw out there. And it's a great service that Bitergia offers, and you can get so many different metrics and lots of different graphs and charts that look really impressive on a slide deck. But do they mean anything to you? And that's the key part. Right? You can get lots of great data, but you have to make sure it means something.
I love your response. I feel like OSPO is just like developer relations, where it's such it's not a very old thing yet. And so metrics is always like the first topic and the last topic, I guess, that people discuss, because we discuss it for so long. Anyway, let's move on from metrics. I'm interested in, whenever you're trying to find out more about what an OSPO does, you come across the to-do group. Explain to the audience what the to-do group is and why people should look at it.
I think Vicky should answer this one.
But I've talked so much. I want to let other people talk. So I am on the steering committee of the to-do group. And it is one of the innumerable sub-foundations under the Linux Foundation. There's a new one every week, it seems like. But the to-do group specifically is around, I call it as I see it. So the to-do group is specifically around primarily corporate open source program offices and people who are trying to learn about doing open source within a company. There is another group called OSPO that works with academics and more civic things, like the city of Paris and various universities and things like that. OSPO++. If you're in Europe, I highly recommend you look at OSPO Zone, OSPO.zone, which is the OSPO Alliance, and that's under the Eclipse Foundation. And they have this excellent resource that they recently released called the Good Governance Initiative that came out of OW2, which is based in France. And they are collaborating with Eclipse Foundation for that. And the Good Governance Initiative is this really great kind of framework for looking at your company and where does it fall within this, where does its internal governance model around open source fall within here, and what do you do to get to the next step, right? And so that's a really great resource. And so while To-Do Group is a good resource, and as a steering committee member, I'm obviously somewhat biased, there are tons of resources out there. And as soon as I finish writing it, there's going to be another one because I'm writing a book. So there'll be more. That one will take a little less of your time than showing up to all of these meetings for all of these different groups, I hope.
Right. Okay, so for the parting words, I definitely want to hear more about that book, so keep that in mind. I wanted to sort of shout out the report that the To-Do Group published with Chris, the evolution of open source program office. Is that something we want to give an executive summary of? Now I'm just looking at whose ever eyes show me that they've read it in full. Is it just me?
It's
just me. So
I got to say, as a steering committee member, I did not know that report was coming out. So I have not yet read it. And this is something that was undertaken, I believe, by Linux Foundation Research, which puts out a lot of very valuable reports, lots of data. But this is not one. It may have kicked off before I joined the steering committee in January. So,
No, I feel some of the surveys come from 2021. Yes, Josep.
It's literally on my table to read.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say that you took a highlighter and you were like, no.
No, I need to do that. So I did the first step.
So, Vicky, what you said about the Linux Foundation putting out a new initiative here and there, left and right, every week. I felt a little bit like this with reading the report, because of course there is a OSPO maturity model that has 5 steps that sound really linear, and I can't believe. And from talking to the 3 of you, I don't believe that that's it's so clear cut. But I thought it was interesting nevertheless. So maybe for some people, just read the executive summary though. That's enough.
Was there a question in there that I'm supposed to answer? Because I'm not sure.
Not anymore. I was hoping that someone would give me a very excited executive summary, but I guess
wait. Executive summary. It's complicated.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it depends.
I also,
right?
I believe I skimmed through the thing, and it was a lot of metrics. I believe it's just a lot of metrics again. So we can start with the metrics, and then we can report about metrics. And yes, there's this.
Oh no, you broke Floor.
I'll recover at some point. Awesome. We talked about OSPOs as tech, and I promise you, like we're bringing this to an end because we're virtual all day, every day. And I am sure that we can talk about this topic for hours and hours and hours, but maybe people don't want to listen to us for hours and hours, which I don't know, fair enough. We talk about OSPOs in tech companies, but what about some of the OSPOs in other industries? Vicky, I feel like you know more about this, but I'm interested. Like, is there a particular industry that is really coming up in terms of there's a lot of OSPOs initiated?
Financial services, lots of OSPOs in financial services, and automotive as well. And automotive is very interesting because unlike what most of we do, I mean, Josep said, well, are you releasing your software several times a day? Because you should be. And I was like, yes, you should be, unless it's embedded, in which case, screw you, because you install it once and then you can't update it, right? And that's a situation that a lot of these hardware vendors and people who use stuff from hardware vendors, such as automotive, they are in a situation where they really need to pay attention to embedded. And so they are doing a lot of work around this, around open source. So automotive is paying a great deal of attention to open source now. Porsche recently launched an OSPO. I know Daimler has one. The Beamers, I think BMW and Mercedes, Beamer and Merck, I think they have them. So there's a lot of OSPOs out there, but financial services in particular, and that's largely being driven by compliance on their side because they're highly regulated industry. So they have special needs right there. So yeah, lots going on outside of software because we are all software companies when you get right down to it, right? If you're packaging breakfast cereal or if you're launching this space shuttle, right? It's still all software when you get right down to it. It's running everything, which is either good or bad, depending upon your point of view.
And I think going to the point of we are all software companies. I mean, also public sector and governments is basically one of the biggest software companies now because of all the different public systems that's running, moving to digital instead of pen and paper, except for Germany, of course, but that's a different story. But my home country, Denmark, has pretty much digitalized every piece of bureaucratic process you have. And so they have a massive amount of software and they don't have an OSPO and they don't have an idea of how to manage all these things.
They can come to Wipro. We've helped them. We've helped. Like we actually did. Oman recently needed to do this, and so we've helped the country of Oman, come up with an open source center of excellence where they can help to build the company or the country's ecosystem, economy a lot more through open source and software development, and help to sustain as Denmark has their internal infrastructures and stuff. So there are countries that are doing that, and it's like again, Paris is doing a lot of that.
Yeah. So what is sorry, I'm taking off Laura's role of an interviewer now, but what is the objective of a government for an OSPO then?
A lot of the same things that your businesses will have, but again, economy. If you can build a stronger tech sector, if you can bring in a lot more people with those skills, you can help to build an economy and businesses, and importantly, to sustain and transform the ones that are already there, right? And so that's something to help bring companies up and evolve them into more modern operations. You need the knowledge base to do that, and that means bringing in technology and software. And if you're bringing in technology and software, that immediately means you're bringing in an immense amount of free and open source software. And if you don't know how to do that right, then you're not going to do the software right and the technology right, which means you're not going to build your economy better, right? You're not going to attract those great big brains who are going to have that VC funding trailing after them, right? And that funding is great investment into your company, into your country. So there's a lot of really good reasons for a country. I keep doing that, for a country to do this.
Let's say that some countries seem like companies sometimes, and that might be the reason why. I want to also mention, there was the European Open Source Summit a month ago, probably, and France was launching or was communicating that it was launching a OSPO at country level. And one of the reasons why they do this thing as well is for data sovereignty. I pronounce this word terribly.
The EU is doing a lot of that.
And the European Union is doing a lot of effort on trying to be independent on data, on infrastructure, on cloud. So we are not the ones depending on every single else, and we don't have anything. So that's one of the reasons why countries or supra-country organizations and bodies try to do OSPOs, to try to get some reins of the direction of where software is going, so they can get some kind of control and guide it to whatever they want it to be guided. And then there is also the European, it's probably more European way of thinking that if it's publicly funded, it should be available. So it should be open source, which I subscribe to. Yeah, I also applaud with everything, with all the hands in my body, the two of them. And so that's another quote. You see, it's another end quote that, anyway. So, but anyway, that's another reason why they want to have some kind of body to help and do those things and reduce waste. And one of the clear examples of that one was the WARN apps. So all the corona tracing apps that every single country created its own one. Really few countries reutilized different versions of other countries. It could have been done way better if we would have some kind of people who know and people who understand how things are. And it's not just producing. It's collaboration.
Right. And the EU is a really great place for that, where they can actually, I found that the EU moves and the Open Forum Europe, OFE, is the group that works a great deal with the European Commission to do these sorts of things. I found Europe moves a lot more slowly than we do in the US. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think we can probably split the difference, but it does a lot of great things like, protect privacy of its citizens from the companies that unfortunately are based in the US, where screw privacy, who cares, right? And so I appreciate that digital sovereignty that they're bringing in for the sake of the protection of the citizens. And how can we use open source software in order to do that, right? And having the software be more open allows you to see whether it is sending your data in a different direction, or what data it's even collecting. So they're doing some really great stuff over in Europe, and they're putting a lot of effort into it, and they're doing it in the open. So I've been very glad watching for the past, I think 4 years. It started before that, but it's really picked up a lot in the last 4 years or so. And it's very inspiring. So yay, go EU.
Also, just because earlier in the meetup, Josep, you also said something about you can't. Open sourcing is just not just publishing it on GitHub, and I was sort of triggered by the whole COVID apps and being different COVID apps being created by different countries, and those apps being thrown online with database credentials and all. So what else do you need to think about when you want to open source something?
Sure.
And maybe we'll make the little round, and that will be your parting statement. So make it really count.
Okay. So I think the first thing you need to ask yourself is, should we really open that one? So because we want to just push things out and just throw many new things, and sometimes as a vanity thing as well. Like, look what we created. We need to create new things, and look, that's our portfolio thing, and it's a visible thing to go and look at. But probably the first question we should be asking is there anything else that exists that we should be jumping and collaborating into, instead of just throwing another thing on the pile? So I try to say, we should not just basically contribute to the contribution pile of the open source world, like throwing more things into this pile that needs to be maintained, but we need to just try to get things out of that. So trying to contribute things and not add more things into that pile to maintain. So that's the first question, is is it really needed? Do we really need that project, or can we jump to another one? Can we collaborate with some other ones? If we decide that that's a project that is needed because no other project exists, or because no other project is open that exists, because that could be valid. Maybe they don't have an open license, or it's a restrictive license. That's a fair reason. You can say, no, we want to just create this one because it's truly open. Then let's go for it. But then you need to make sure that first that there will be a community need for that one. It's not just my project and I just open source it because I want to get some freeloading maintenance, and people on the internet will help me maintain this thing. If that's your purpose, I wouldn't call this thing open source. It's another thing. It's basically throwing it off the fence and just hope for the best that people will give their time for free and help you on maintenance of this project. Probably not the best thing to do. So think twice if that's the only reason why you want to open source it. So if you think that the community has a use for it, and that they will basically swarm around it, like if they realize that this project exists and it's good enough, they would basically go around it, then that's a really good thing. That's a really good start. Then you need to make sure that the project has everything needed, so people feel safe to contribute there. People feel welcome to contribute there, and people know that it's a safe place to go and spend their time. And they understand how it works. They understand how it's governed. There is no hidden, really weird things happening behind the scenes. It's everything clear, what's happening, what's not happening. And the more transparent it is, the better. And then GitHub has a lot of different guides and checklists when you want to open source a project, that it's like, you need to have this file. This file means you have the README, you need to have a contributing file, you need to have a security, like a contact for security reasons. It's good to have those kind of reports that you can report when something bad happens. You need to have a code of conduct. So these are the things that you can, it's a checklist that it's really useful to know, like, okay, I'm doing the bare minimum to foster a community around. But then you need to foster the community. Then you need to build that community behind. You need a commitment. You need to have people dedicated to this project, look after it, talk to the people, listen to what the people say, take care of the people coming to your project, giving you feedback, providing patches, and trying to be reactive to them, not just basically ignoring them and letting them sit there for a long time, trying to be as responsive as you possibly can and making it a welcoming place. That could be my ending final statement for what.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I'm not sure if that was parting words or parting paragraphs, but
it's paragraph. Sorry.
That's totally fine. Per, do you want to go next?
Yes, I can try to keep it a bit shorter. Yeah, I think reducing is just the first step of many, and I think to this longer journey, you need some sort of plan. So just like have some sort of plan, have some sort of roadmap, and just be ready to change that over time. And then just realize the terrible truth, and that the code has absolutely no value. The value is in the ownership and in the maintainership. If you just release code, it is of no value to anyone. It is your maintainership and ownership that has value. And then I think don't see it as an opportunity to get free work, as Josep also said. You can build it, and people will come with their opinions, and that's typically what happens.
I love that one. Vicky?
So what I'm going to say is not. These are words that have existed for a very long time. I did not make them up, but they might be quotable. Just don't attribute them to me, aside from I said them. So in free and open source software, we have free as in beer. Like, you don't have to pay for this thing. It is free beer. Who doesn't like free beer? Well, I don't, because I don't drink. But aside from that, I know I'm such a disappointment, Josep. So we have free as in beer. And then we have free as in freedom. Like, you have the 4 freedoms to use, modify, redistribute, all those sorts of things. You have those freedoms to do that with free and open source software. And those 4 freedoms are enshrined within the open source definition as well. So it's not just free software, but it's open source, where you have the freedom to look at, to inspect, to repurpose and use for any reason whatsoever this software. And that's very important and very fundamental. But then in this case, you have free as in puppy, where you have this new puppy. Now you have to take care of it. And so you have to make sure that puppy stays healthy. It stays fed. It's, gets its shots. It doesn't go attacking other dogs or other neighbors or the post person, right? The postal carrier. So you have to make sure of that as well, right? And you also have to decide. I was talking to a friend earlier this morning. Do you even want that dog? Are you allergic to dogs? And it turns out they can't get a dog because their child is allergic to dogs. They would, if they hadn't paused to think about that. And that's where you have to pause and think, do we even want to do this? As Josep said, do we want to release this? Right? Ask, can you get a puppy? And once you get a puppy, can you take care of it? Because you can't just get a puppy and say, oh, puppy, and then walk away. You have to maintain that. And then there's one that my friend and colleague, Deb Nicholson, formerly of Open Source Initiative, formerly of Free Software Foundation. She's a brilliant person and a great free software activist. She came up with free as in mattress. So free mattress, you get a mattress, and is that free? Yeah, it's free. You find it on the street, it's totally free. But that doesn't mean it's a good thing to pick up and use. So you have to make sure that your free software, your open source project, does not become a free mattress, because that's a problem. And that's just kind of the next step after puppy. Is it attacking your postal carrier? So yeah, yes, absolutely. Josep points out, don't buy a puppy, adopt a puppy. Exactly. Adopt, don't shop. There's lots of really great puppies out there that need your love. So go adopt a puppy today, if you can.
or adopt the repo. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you for the people that have been watching and putting up with us for longer than an hour. I hope you're still here for next month's edition on open source databases, but who'll know. So that's April 13 for anyone who wants to join and, put a little placeholder in their calendar, save the dates. You can register, you don't have to register, and we'll be right here or on whatever platform you've been watching. Thank you, Josep, Vicky, and Per. This has been a pleasure.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. It was a pleasure, awesome, and really fun to be here.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I think we managed to break floor several times.
We did, yeah. And apologies.
But I always recover.
Yeah.
I come back from it.
So sorry for that, Floor.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.